Welcome, everybody. I'm Lisa Walker of Hyattsville Aging in Place, and this is the third edition of Corridor Conversations of 2023. I hesitate to say that spring has sprung, but it's time to start thinking about planting your vegetables and getting your flowers out. We're happy to have Dave Roeder, a Hyattsville resident, to talk to us about both growing vegetables and landscaping with native plants. I'll introduce Dave in a second. You can see him on your screen. First, a bit about Corridor Conversations. We try to host sessions that bring people and the culture of Route 1 to our various towns. The program is sponsored by Hyattsville Aging in Place, Helping Hands University Park, Neighbors Helping Neighbors College Park, and Explorations on Aging. Dave's going to talk in two sections today. First, about planting vegetables and various ways you can do it and what needs to be done when. And then a section on native plants. He's going to take questions after each section. Dave's been an avid gardener since he started, most of his life, since he started growing vegetables with his mom on a Kansas farm in the 1960s. He was a founding member of the first Hyattsville Community Garden, Hyatt Park Community Garden, where he grew vegetables and flowers for pollinators for many years. Over the past 15 years, his interest has expanded to focus on native plants. He volunteered with Chesapeake Natives Nursery for 5 years, during which time his knowledge grew considerably. He also worked with a DC nonprofit, training men and women returning from incarceration to help them start businesses and vegetables. He mentored men from this program on native plant landscaping and trained them to install rain gardens and bayscapes through DC River Smart program. I may ask him to help me with that. For the past 2 years, he has served as a habitat advisor with Audubon Wildlife Habitat Program in Prince George's County. And as I said, he'll split his talk into two parts. You can ask questions, put them in the chat box, and take it away, Dave.
Thank you, Lisa. Lisa actually failed to mention another thing that I'm known for is I'm kind of the Hyattsville Aging in Place toilet king. If your toilet breaks down or if your kitchen sink explodes, I'm probably the volunteer that will come by and try to rescue you. But and that's fun too. So let's talk about gardening. I'm going to share my screen if I can. I'm also a Luddite, so oh, here we go. And my presentation. Here. Oh, wow, work. And okay. Now I've been at the title of my talk is, can everybody hear me okay? Is Gardening for a Healthy Mind, Body, and Planet. And I've been accused of being kind of new agey with this. And I actually mean it not in such a new agey way, but in a really literally. Gardening is, there are really no downsides to gardening. It invigorates the mind, being in nature and watching things grow, and being in the sunshine. It's just wonderful mental break from a lot of stresses in life. And when you eat food, that's good for your body. So vegetable gardening and growing of fruits and vegetables is just replenishes your mind and your body. And both the way that you garden with your vegetables and what you do with the rest of your property, you can have a very positive impact on our planet too. So why do we garden? For food, relaxation. It's really good physical activity. And we garden for the beauty. It is a beautiful endeavor, and we can garden to help the environment. So since I'm hungry, and you might be too, let's start by talking about gardening for food. It doesn't have to take a lot of space. You can garden on your windowsill, or you can garden on the 3-acre plot you have out back. It doesn't have to require a lot of physical exertion. And we're going to talk today about ways that you can garden without breaking your back. All you need is a sunny spot of pretty much any size, and you can have a vegetable garden. So what we're going to talk today about are container gardens. These are kind of the three major ways to grow vegetables. We can do container gardens, raised bed gardens, or the old-fashioned way where you just plant directly in the soil, where most of us grew up gardening. So let's look at container gardens. It's suitable for pretty much any sunny space, regardless of the size. If you have enough space for one pot, you can do container garden. And once it's set up, it takes very little physical effort. And the other thing that's wonderful is you don't have to worry about weeds if you're growing in a bucket. Unless your bucket had weeds when you started. You can use any kind of container. You can buy containers, like they're made out of all sorts of stuff, fiberglass, ceramic, it can be glazed or porous terracotta, which is good. You can have some high-techy looking metal ones. They're made of plastic or resin. You can wooden containers, or you could use pretty much any old bucket you have laying around. And from my perspective, as the Hyattsville aging in place toilet king, I have to say that you could actually use an old toilet. You can grow strawberries in the tank part of it and maybe green beans in the bowl, but you probably want to put that in your backyard because I don't think Dawn would appreciate if you had a row of toilets growing vegetables in your front yard, but be creative. All you need, and you also need whatever container you use, especially if you use repurposing something, you make sure you have to have a drainage hole. And as far as the soil goes, if you're just starting with container gardening, it's probably best to buy a potting mix from Home Depot or someplace. If you want to look into it further, you can make your own mix, but it's not just digging soil out of your garden. Growing in the container, you need a lot more aeration and all of that. And then you need some sunshine. A lot of folks ask if you can grow vegetables in your windowsill. And depending on your living situation, a lot of people, the only really sunny spot they have is maybe their kitchen window. Well, you certainly can grow vegetables in your windowsill, but you want to be careful to consider the limitations that your kitchen windowsill offers. You might think it's the sunniest spot in the world and that it gets this bright sun coming through, but even when you do have a really sunny windowsill, with all the filtration and the blocking and everything, you're not going to have the kind of sunlight that you have out in your yard or in your patio. So there are certain vegetables that grow better under those lower light conditions. And that would include your basic spring greens like lettuce, and kale, and cress. Cress, I think, is a particularly good one for growing on your indoors. You can grow microgreens. Some people grow baby beetroots. You're not going to get your big fat beets that you would grow out in your garden, but you can have the more delicate, small roots. Radishes, and then of course herbs grow well in the kitchen. But if you're moving outside your kitchen onto your patio, we can do container gardening, and that's where you got all your buckets and pots and everything. But certain types of vegetables are actually better for growing in the containers. Your leafy greens, like kale, lettuce, collards, all of those are just wonderful for containers. They don't have a huge root system, so you don't have to haul in that much soil. Root vegetables are the same, radishes, carrots, beets, all of that. And then, of course, herbs. You can grow any herb in a container. And then if you want to go bigger, this takes a little more care in getting the situation right with your size and your sunlight and everything, but you can grow tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants in containers. Now, they have a bigger root system, so you're going to need at least a 12-inch deep container. 5-gallon or 7-gallon bucket works great. And also, especially with the tomatoes, you don't want to just grow any tomato in your container. There are just look at the package. There are certain varieties that have been developed more for container gardening, and they tend to be the short, bushy kind, or else the cherry tomatoes work really well too. But you can grow a lot of stuff in your patio with containers. And the most important thing, one of the most important things in my talk here today is the potato. Do not forget the potato. There's few things in this world that bring you more joy than growing a whole bucket full of potatoes on your patio. And it's fun to do, especially if you have kids. If your grandkids come over and you want to do a gardening project in the spring, just get a 5-gallon bucket and a potato from your kitchen, and you could have a lot of fun. And it's really quite easy to do. It's there's a real specific method that you have to do though. First of all, you get your potatoes and you let them sit in your counter, getting to the point where you really don't want to eat them anymore, and they get all sprouted and all that. You want to be a little careful in that most of the potatoes you buy in the store are treated with a chemical that inhibits their sprouting. If you get them from a more organic kind of source, I buy my potatoes from Glut and I get good sprouting on those. So I have to eat them fast. So you get your bucket and then you only put about 5 inches of soil at the bottom. And then you just stick your potatoes down on the bottom of that bucket. And then you cover them up with about another couple inches of soil. And so you can see on the bottom left here where they sprout, and then you get them to grow about 6 inches tall. And then on the right there, you see you fill it up with soil all the way to the top of the growing tip. And then you let it grow and you fill it up, you let it grow and you fill it up, and you keep doing that. And what you're doing is you're creating a stem that's underground stem that's the whole length of that bucket. And potatoes, botanically speaking, are not roots. They're actually underground stems. So if you have that long section of stem underground, that's going to send out potatoes everywhere. And then you dump the bucket out and you get this. And it's really a lot of fun. I'm thinking maybe we should have like a HAP potato challenge every year and have people who are interested to grow a bucket of potatoes, and then Sally will put them on the newsletter, pictures in the newsletter in the fall. So we can have fun with that. Okay, the next one we're going to look at is raised bed gardens. That's my favorite way to grow vegetables because you can, for a number of reasons, and I have them written out so I don't have to remember here. So the soil, you can enrich the soil and get really wonderful, fluffy soil that grows good vegetables. You can grow carrots with really long, deep roots because you're not stepping on it. You get it all, you work around from the outside. It's easier to control weeds if you do it right. You get improved drainage. If you have a really hard-packed clay in your backyard, if you build a raised bed over that, you can have a really nice, well-drained soil. It's less physically demanding, provided you get the neighbor kid to build it for you and fill it with the soil. Then at that point, it's really pretty not real physically demanding. And it can be designed so that you can sit on the side while you're gardening. So you can just kind of sit down, have a cup of tea, and then poke around in your vegetable garden. It can be pretty relaxing. And you can grow vegetables more densely because you don't have rows in it. It's solid vegetables in that raised bed. And they're very neat in appearance. So you can have them in your front yard and you won't get yelled at by the city. And I got a couple of local examples here. Here's I'm terrible. I'm blanking on Ryan's last name. Lives on Jefferson Street, and Ryan and his son do this. It's 4 beautiful raised beds that they built themselves. And it's the kind of thing you can put in your front yard. And the best thing about this garden, in the far right-hand corner, the upper right-hand corner, is a strawberry patch. And one of those beds, he grows strawberries in it. And they're just beautiful to look at. And with the possible exception of potatoes, it's probably the most satisfying thing you can grow in your vegetable garden. And I've eaten some of these strawberries. I didn't steal them. He actually gave me some. And they're just homegrown strawberry is a whole different thing. You're really not, you really can't buy those in the store. So you can have a lot of fun and grow some really cool stuff with raised beds. And if you walk up the street about a half a block, you'll see this. You've probably all seen this property. It's Lucas and Laura Wyant. And Lucas is he just done a wonderful job with this garden. And it's raised beds, and the whole side of the yard is growing vegetables. But the other thing that Lucas does that I really want to point out here and kind of throughout the talk is gardening for vegetables and gardening for wildlife isn't mutually exclusive. What Lucas does is throughout his garden, he has flowers, native plants, and zinnias, things like zinnias you can see. But in the upper left hand, you'll see this tall plant. That's a Joe Pye weed. And far to the left, that whole front corner of his yard is planted to flowers. It's a mix of non-natives and natives. So he has a very wonderfully environmentally sound and highly food producing front yard. And if you look at this view, it's really quite beautiful. And so there's just a lot of stuff you can do all over your property as long as you got some sun.
He also did this over time.
Yeah, he did. Oh yeah, he didn't do this in a year. Yeah, that's important to say. This garden has been growing and developing for at least 10 years. You know, it was all just flat grass when he moved in. But it is something that just kind of grows with you. It's kind of like raising a child, except you can eat your vegetables. Okay, so how to build a raised bed. It's pretty straightforward. You need 2-inch thick rot-resistant lumber. It could be cedar or redwood, and you can use pressure-treated lumber. Now, I might have heard a little bit of intake of breath when I said that, because pressure-treated lumber does have a bad reputation of being toxic for like growing food, but that really is way in the past. Like I think they stopped that like around the 70s, but modern pressure-treated lumber is safe for growing food. It has one of the agents that it has for inhibiting fungus is copper, and copper is in a certified organic fungicide that's used in organic growing. There is, I believe, another fungicide in there. So if you really want to be totally growing organically, you might want to do cedar or redwood. But if you can't afford that, pressure treated is a safe way to go. The ideal size for that is like 4 by 8 feet. So you can buy 8-foot lumber and either use it whole or cut it in two, and you've got your wood. So what you do, and I'm going to show you some pictures of this, so bear with me. You bolt the sides together, and then in the corners, you can reinforce it with like 2x4s or 4x4s. And then you can also add a lip on the top of it as a seating, a seating surface. So what we've got here then, okay, so this is my friend Melvin, and he is constructing a raised bed very simply. It's 2x8s. Pressure treated 2x8s, and he's just screwing them in from the side. Now, the next one we've got, and that's Melvin again on the side, looking very satisfied with himself. This is a bed that I built with some friends, and we kind of were working on, we were going to start a business where we made raised bed gardens for people. And as it turned out, our product was very good, as you can see there, but we didn't really get it together until like July, and that was kind of past raised bed season, so it never really got off the ground. But this is a good example of how you can grow one. So what we used there was 2x4s, and then on the corners, this is kind of important. On the corners, we bolted the 2x4s directly into 4x4 posts. And that gives you a really solid box. And then around the edge, we just laid 2x4s on the side, on the edge, so that and you could do a 2x6 there to have a broader top that you can sit on. And then what you do here is you dig out all of the soil and really get all of the weeds out of there. And that's very important because If you don't, if you have these perennial weeds down in there, especially something like wiregrass that's really pernicious, it can just give you a lot of headaches. So clean it out of weeds really fast, thoroughly, and then you fill it up with really high organic content soil. And the other thing, and this is Lucas's garden again, what he's done is his are very simple. It's hardly not tech, it's just kind of barely technically a raised bed because it's not raised very much. But what he's done is created these wooden borders very simply by just putting stakes in the ground and putting a board up against it. But it defines a bed and allows him to kind of manage that soil very luxuriously so that and keep the weeds out and be able to plant the vegetables more densely. So, and one thing I want to note here is this was an earlier year, I think, in his garden before it's quite filled up so much. So this is kind of like after a couple of years of gardening, but look at all the vegetables that he is growing there. It's really quite amazing. Okay, so how to plant your raised bed? Like I kind of said this already, dig it deeply to aerate it, add lots of compost, and you build the soil level all the way to the top and remove all the weeds. That's really critical. And then you plant your vegetables and sit back and be happy, because that will make you very happy. Okay, the other way to do this is Okay, you can do the old-fashioned way, the way I grew up, the way many of you probably gardened as children, and that's having a little farm in your backyard. And you have rows of vegetables with the pathways in between. And it's got its pluses and minuses. One, it takes a lot more space. And it requires a lot more physical labor because you do generally need to dig it and weed it and all of that. And weeding is a bigger deal there. However, the setup cost is pretty much, you need to invest in a shovel, and that's about it. So it doesn't cost anything really to get a garden like this started. And if you got the space, you can grow lots and lots and lots of vegetables.
Again, you can start small.
And you can, yes, as Lisa pointed out, you can start really small here. You can start with like a 4-foot square and then build out from that. And it's a nice thing to kind of tinker with, to see if you like gardening. It's a great way to just kind of dip your toes in the water with gardening. So when should you plant? I want to emphasize, this is a very rough guide, but just to kind of give you an idea of kind of the span of when you plant things. In February and March, you basically have cool season vegetables and warm season vegetables. And in February and March, around here, you can start planting your cool season vegetables. And that is a lot of basically what you put in a salad. It's carrots, radishes, beets, peas, all of your spring greens like lettuce, kale, arugula, collards, and spinach, and of course potatoes, and cauliflower, broccoli, and herbs. Most of your herbs. There's one exception I'll talk about. So that gets you going in the spring. And then you really don't want to plant your hot season vegetables in the cool weather. Even though Home Depot will be selling tomatoes in March, you don't want to do that because they're just going to sit in the ground and be unhappy until the weather warms up. So in April, you can start planting your kind of mid-season vegetables like squash and cucumbers and green beans. But personally, they say green beans in April, but I've found that when I planted green beans in April, they kind of didn't come up until May. So I usually wait till like 1st of May to plant green beans. And then you wait until it's hot, like hotter, I should say. Hopefully it's not too hot in May, but in May you can plant your potatoes, your peppers, or tomatoes, I'm sorry, your peppers, eggplants. And the one herb that really kind of needs warm weather is basil. And I usually don't put my basil plants out. I start them indoors, put them out in May. And then you kind of cycle through the season. Your spring vegetables you planted are kind of burning out. But I wanted to point out a very important thing about the spring vegetables. If you look at the seed catalogs, there's going to be certain cool season lettuces and greens that are labeled for heat tolerance. And if you can find those lettuces that can grow in the heat, you can plant them like every couple of weeks all summer. There's one particular one, it's called lettuce called Jericho, and it was developed in Israel. It's just a wonderful lettuce that you can plant all through the summer. So those can kind of go cycle all, kind of plant repeatedly. And then in the fall, like August and September, you can start that all over again. You can plant probably not, I'm not sure you can get away with cauliflower and broccoli, but everything else, and the potatoes up there, but all of your greens and your typical early spring vegetables can all be planted in fall. And many of them, like some of the like kale and carrots and maybe the beets, they can be let in the ground into the winter, and just it kind of keeps them in. They're not going to grow, but they keep really fresh and crisp out in your garden, and you can kind of pick them well into the winter. Feeding and watering. Let's see. Yeah, you really don't recommend that you use chemical fertilizers. If you put a lot of compost in your soil, you probably don't need to fertilize it at all. But there's lots of organic fertilizers that you can use, or if you have a cow, you can use, or a horse, you can use their byproducts. Like there's organic fertilizers like kelp meal, alfalfa meal, things like that. So you can be you really don't have to resort to, nitrogen fertilizers. Water regularly, but not extravagantly. Just don't let the soil dry out completely, because the vegetables do need more water than some things that you're growing. And of course, don't overwork. Don't saturate the soil, but keep it moist and aerated. For container gardens, and of course, make sure you have drain holes, or you're going to have waterlogged plants. And weeds. Weeds are the bane of the garden. Now, with weeds, I think it's important to find your zen with weeds. Some people are comfortable, kind of living harmoniously with the weeds and kind of, growing things and letting things exist. I'm not that way. I have to get rid of all the weeds, but find out what works best for you. You're going to have a more productive garden if you have no weeds, but you don't have to, stress out about it. The one thing that I think you really need to be careful about, there are a couple of really pernicious weeds that send runners underground. And like one in particular, it's a type of fescue. We call it wiregrass, and it can send underground runners like 5 or 6 feet. And if you've got something like that going into your garden, you want to cut it off all around the edges to cut off the source and then dig out the offending remains. That's what I do, but I'm an obsessive about weeds. And we're for raised beds and planting, and when you're planting the grass, using a straw mulch is really good because you can keep the weeds down that way. I haven't tried this, but it's certainly worth looking into. I was reading about this in the Times the other day. It's a no-dig method. It's kind of a takeoff on the no-till farming method, but it's a way of gardening where you don't dig up the soil. You use the soil as it is, and then you build its structure and its integrity through adding compost and just planting directly. So weed control is a little more complicated, and you have to be more patient, but it's worth looking into. If you're interested, I recommend this book. It's very similar to what we advocate for native plant gardening. And here are some local gardening resources. The city of Hyattsville has a great program of delivering leaf mulch to our parks. They're going to start around the end of March, and it's kind of roughly every week they dump more. Hyatt Park Community Garden, I believe they have some openings this spring. That's a great place if you don't have sun on your own property. It's a really good opportunity to grow tons of it. You can grow in one of those plots, you can grow a lot of vegetables. You might even pair up with a friend or two to share a plot. Hyattsville Horticulture Society is a good place to hook up with other gardeners. And we are having a seed sale right now, and the link is right there. And another, if you want to get a lot of compost, College Park delivers compost at a very reasonable cost. And this stuff is good. It's all screened and it's all free of junk and everything. And I also have a link here to the Maryland Extension Home and Garden information. That's a really good resource for getting information on all kinds of gardening. So it's time for questions. Do we have any questions?
We do.
Yes, we do. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Somebody wanted to know what you think of growing vertically, like with the trellises.
Oh, yes, growing vertically is wonderful. You certainly make a lot of use out of every square foot. There are certain things that are more like one thing I've seen, I've never tried it. It was very pretty. They sell these, you can grow strawberries in like towers. Other things, there are climbing vegetables like cucumbers are really good to grow in trellises. And of course, tomatoes, you really want to grow up rather than out. Another one I love to grow vertically are pole beans. They're regular beans that kind of grow on trellises, but there's another really fun one. It's called the yard long bean, and it's an Asian variety. It's technically not a bean actually, but it has these beans that are like 2 feet long, and you chop, and it's just fun to grow. And it's very delicious too. Is that kind of get you there?
Also, when you were talking about container gardens, can you grow spaghetti squash and or sweet potatoes in buckets?
I think sweet potatoes, I think, would work really well. You want a really big container, and then you would want to grow them. You could grow them they could like hang over a wall or kind of spread along the patio or something. But if you didn't have that much space, you could grow them on a trellis. I think they would grow well. Squashes, I don't know too much about that. I would probably Google that, Google growing squash in containers, because you would want to get a variety that you could grow in a trellis. So it'd have to be something that's not too heavy. So it'd have to be a fairly lightweight squash. I think things like zucchini, your summer squashes might be better. And I think, yeah, so but I think if you just Google grow squashes in container gardens, it would give you some really good advice.
Interestingly, not quite a squash, but I have neighbors that planted watermelon seeds in a bucket, and I thought, oh no, this is ridiculous. It's never going to happen. They must have had 20 watermelons out of this thing that grew in a bucket. It covered the whole front yard, the trails of it.
Oh,
it was
cool.
It was amazing.
It's delightful. You could grow them in your driveway.
Yeah. I have a couple of interesting fertilizer questions. One is, can you use human urine for fertilizer?
People do. I don't. I had a friend. Now, this is true. This was another era. I had a friend from Tacoma Park who was this classic, down-to-earth guy who ran around. He always carried a bottle with him, and he emptied that bottle in his compost pile. It's a good source of urea. It's a really good source of nitrogen. It just depends on the ick factor, because urine is sterile.
Would Public Works or anybody care about that?
You'll have to ask Public Works.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Or maybe just don't tell anybody.
The other question was, can you use chicken manure?
Oh yes, chicken manure is really good, with one caveat. Chicken manure is very, what you call hot. It's really high nitrogen, and you'd want to let it compost maybe over winter. And what I used to do is add chicken manure to my leaf compost pile. But it'll burn your plants if you use it right away.
Well, and also you can take one of your non-usable or non-container buckets up to the barns at Maryland, and they're very happy to have you shovel out the stables, and
Oh,
you
yes,
can
yes,
bring that stuff home for free.
absolutely.
Just one other question.
Excuse me. I was the one that asked about the chicken manure.
Yeah.
Hi, sorry. So I have 4 bags of it, 40-pound bags coming today. So are you saying, and that I was going to mix in with the soil, but you're saying it's too late to put it in for this planting in the summer or in the spring?
It depends on where where you got it, like how it's been treated before you got it. If it had been, say, sitting around and kind of composting for a few months, it'd be okay. But if it's fresh manure, I would be a little hesitant to use it right away.
Well, it's been in bags from the hardware store.
Oh, from the hardware store, it's probably gone through. It's probably fine. Yeah. If they're selling it as fertilizer, then it would be. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, thanks for clarifying that. That's important.
Excuse me, I had to step out. I had the question about the trellis. I wanted to know if you know how to make a vertical garden with a trellis, or could you refer me to how to make a wall. I was at a presentation yesterday by this man named Ben Fitton from Middletown, Maryland, and he talked about making a vertical garden with a chain link fence or a trellis and putting burlap or something, but he didn't give details. And I tried to check his website and I didn't see any. So that was part of my question. And secondarily related to manure, my brother in South Carolina, he raised rabbits and he used the rabbit. Now I've got tons of rabbits in College Park, but I don't get their droppings in any consistent place.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, rabbit manure would probably be really good. I mean, Joe, my husband used to work he used to run the soil testing lab at University of Maryland, and they would get manure samples from the National Zoo. So we had some very exotic, and he would bring them the leftovers home. So we had some very exotic manure in our compost pile. So
Right.
anyway,
Gives a new
I
meaning
think-
to leftovers.
yeah, I think we need to move on now. I don't want to shortchange the native plant part. And if we have time at the end, we can continue with questions in the vegetable.
Okay, thank you.
We good?
Mhm.
Okay.
I just wanted to recommend this book that I got that I'm enjoying very much, Gardening for a Lifetime. I put the information in the chat, How to Garden Riser as You Grow Older, and it won a National Gardening Club Award of Excellence. So it helps you adjust to things as your body ages.
Okay, thank you for that tip. So let's move on. What about the birds and the bees? It's a very important question with environmental gardening. We are probably not big surprised. Our wildlife is in serious crisis. Over 1 million species of wild animals and plants, or wild, and I think this is animals and insects, are on the verge of extinction. And mass extinction threatens our ability to survive on this planet. If our insects go much further than they are, we're going to have a really hard time. How did we get to this point? If a picture says 1,000 words, I think what we have here, I guess 4,000 words. This is the lot of our landscape now. We have miles and miles and miles of monoculture agriculture. We have hillsides, mountainsides, whole swaths of woodland that have been just completely cut bare. We have dense pavement covered urban and suburban landscapes. And on the bottom right is my favorite, the landscape that's being devoured by kudzu, and which leaves very little room for our wildlife to find what it needs to thrive and even survive. If we use environmentally sound landscaping practices individually, you can really make a big difference. And the one concept I really want to try to get through here is treating our landscape as a community or an as a form of building community or ecosystem. Land, our wild spaces aren't just collections of plants and individual animals. All of those things interrelate. And we really have to learn to appreciate and understand that interrelationship as we approach, building a environmentally sound landscape. And what we want to do is create an environment that is as diverse as possible. And also, and this is really important for where we live next to the bay, pay attention to water usage and runoff management. And landscaping with native plants really addresses all of these things. Now, another real important concept I really want to kind of drive home here, and I'm going to hound you about it for the rest of the talk, is when we think of gardening for wildlife, we mostly have been kind of trained to think about pollen and nectar and seeds and berries. And while I don't want to downplay the importance of these, they're all critically important for our wildlife, but equally important and almost always neglected is the importance of insects in this ecology. In fact, insects, mostly in the form of caterpillars, are far more important than seeds as a food source for birds, especially when they're raising their young. Now, let's just imagine for a moment that I'm a mama bird and I'm looking for some tasty snacks for my baby birds. I'm not actually, I really don't think I would be wanting to throw a hard sunflower seed down this delicate little gullet here. These little babies are not eating nuts and seeds and berries. They're eating this. Now, you probably think of these as caterpillars. Now, me as the mama bird, I'm looking at those as like these plump, juicy bags of fat and sugar, protein, and all those things that it's just nutrient packed, very easily digestible units of baby bird nutrition. And so caterpillars are really the foundation, kind of the foundation of healthy baby bird raising, I should say. Now, these caterpillars have to have something to eat. What we have here is a list of our native trees and how many species of Lepidoptera, and that means that's largely the butterflies and the moths that they support. Oak trees, and this is actually an outdated number. More further research has shown the number's up to like 597, I believe. Species are supported by our native oaks. And you look down the list, all of these native trees and how many species of Lepidoptera they support. Now, our imported species, they evolved outside of our ecosystem. Our insects are actually really picky about what plants they like to eat, or not only like to eat, what they're capable of eating because of the chemical makeup of the plants. The gorgeous crepe myrtle is an Asian plant, and it's imported here because it didn't, partly because it's beautiful, but also because it didn't have any pests here. Well, the reason it didn't have any pests here is because our insects can't. So I believe I've heard that there's only like one species of Lepidoptera that actually can survive on a crepe myrtle. So my bottom line here is if you can only plant one native plant in your property, if you plant an oak tree, you're going to do a great service to the environment. So think about these native trees when you're thinking about trying to help wildlife. The other thing that we are all aware of, and that's a wonderful thing to do, is plant a butterfly garden. But there's some really important caveats when you're talking about planting butterfly gardens. It's not go out and plant a bunch of butterfly bushes. Because a butterfly garden, if you really want it to help the butterflies and the moths, it has to be planted with plants that support the entire life cycle of those insects. Now, non-native plants can really attract butterflies and moths with their nectar, but virtually none of them actually serve as hosts for the caterpillars of the butterflies. So they support the adult, but not the young. And so you want to plant plants that support the whole butterfly community, let's just say. And the native plants do that. So how can we, just practical nuts and bolts here, how can we garden in a way to support diversity in our wildlife? A really good book to read, actually there's a couple books, he has 3 books out now. There's an entomologist by the name of Douglas Tallamy, who really put all of this together. He's, what I've just been talking about, he kind of encapsulated that and kind of communicated that in a way that no one had ever really done before. And he made it popular. He's a really, really good writer, and I highly recommend his books. And what his main concept here is that we think of a wildlife as living in, I guess in a sense, we think of 2 kinds of landscapes. There is the natural landscape and then the regular landscape. Now, the natural landscape are our national parks and Driscoll Park and all of those places designated for wildlife. And the regular landscape is where we live. And the 2 are kind of looked at as separately. Well, our wildlife cannot really thrive in these designated areas. They're just not big enough to support wide populations that can kind of, so to where you have like a really broad genetic base, and they get isolated in these little pockets. And what Doug Tallamy is saying is that we can kind of create a new type of a national park, which is basically using our suburban and urban landscapes as a way to bridge these natural areas and allow these wild animals, plants, and insects to link each other across to these native, these natural areas. And he calls this kind of a conglomeration of millions of backyards as a homegrown national park. So what we're trying to do is in Hyattsville, think of Hyattsville as a community that's bonding together to build this, I guess this is beyond Hyattsville, right?
College Park,
Okay.
University Park, and
Yeah.
then maybe people from around.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be,
Montgomery.
I don't mean the port towns.
Maybe.
And all of the
From
town, I mean,
Montgomery.
suburban Washington, we want to make this, we could, and think of all the backyards, all the thousands and thousands of backyards, as everybody did their little bit, we would have this thriving wildlife in our metropolitan area. One thing that people worry about is the aesthetics. A lot of people have this idea that native plants are floppy and kind of sloppy looking. Well, they don't have to be. You can, it's a very legitimate concern, but one can garden with native plants in a very aesthetically pleasing way. Like, look at that. I mean, who could say anything's wrong with that? That's nice. One thing that we've got to get away from is 20 years ago, I would have looked at this and said, oh, those are really nice gardens. They are so neat. They got all this mulch and they have these pretty plants in there. But really, this is like from a wildlife perspective, these are very barren settings. The plants aren't growing the way that they grow in nature. If you go out for a walk and nature, plants just use up every square inch. And these are almost all non-native plants. So there's really nothing in this landscape that really supports nature. Now, there's an alternative to mulch that is very environmentally friendly and actually, I think, a lot prettier. Look at this. These are native ground covers that you can grow. And these are places at the base of a tree, you know, and along pathways and stuff that you would normally think of as places where you'd put mulch. But think about a green mulch. And these, what was it?
Can you name?
Oh, yeah. So on the left, top left, we have here, these are the false Solomon seal. And over here, we have a wild ginger. And then down below that, we have one of my favorites. It's some people call it the native Pachysandra. It's a Allegheny spurge. Something's happening.
Good.
No, something's happening on my screen. I'm sorry. I got it on. It's called Allegheny spurge. Something's doing. And this is, I think this is Pennsylvania sedge here. And here's some more. The top one is a nice mixed landscape. On the upper right, I don't think that's Pennsylvania sedge. The two on the right are both sedges. And the one in the bottom left is one of my favorites. It's called foam flower, if you can imagine why. Really hardy, shade-loving native plant that you can just grow under your trees, under your bushes. And it's just delightful. And the foliage is kind of evergreen. So it's a kind of a 4-season plant. Now, I want to go through and talk about some this versus that. We're going to look at trees and shrubs and plants that we buy at Home Depot and that we have been accustomed to really thinking of as, you know, the mainstays of our landscapes, and all of which are non-natives, and then show you some native alternatives. So let's look at the flowering trees. And here is, it's a crepe myrtle. It's a gorgeous tree. I mean, for years, I just loved crepe myrtles. I was a crepe myrtle aficionado. I grew crepe myrtles from seed, and which turned into big trees. So that tells you how long I was into crepe myrtles. But I have since, understanding the way I look at it is the crepe myrtle. If you look at I'm not saying don't plant crepe myrtles. I mean, but if you do, from the perspective of its contribution to wildlife, think of it as like a garden statue. It's pretty, and you might plant it for aesthetic reasons. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not really contributing a whole lot to the environment. It does provide seeds that I've heard that birds eat, but there's some really good alternatives that are quite nice. Here you got the flowering dogwood.
All dogwoods are native.
Okay, that's a good point. Lisa just asked on the side here if all dogwoods are native. They are not all native. There is a Korean dogwood that, of course, isn't native, but this is the native flowering dogwood, and there are a whole lot of dogwood shrubs that we can talk about later. The beautiful redbud tree. And this is a wonderfully underappreciated tree. It's the American yellowwood. If you'd like to see a good example, Mary Stevenson has one in her backyard that is, it's a mid-sized tree and it has a nice form. It's really quite beautiful. And it has these wonderful cascading pea-like flowers in May that have really nice, delicate scents. It's quite nice. Shrubs. You probably recognize this. This is the heavenly bamboo. And boy, it was a rage. I loved heavenly bamboo. We planted it all over our place. And it's tough as nails. Nothing can kill it. It can grow in sun. It can grow in shade. It has these beautiful berries. Well, it does absolutely nothing for wildlife. And it's become a real invasive pest. And why would you plant that when you could have this? This is the winterberry holly. It's just a delightful plant. And these berries are, the wild birds just love them. We've got this Virginia sweet spire. It's just a lovely native shrub that grows in the shade. Really one of my favorites. And this is actually possibly my favorite native shrub. It's the red chokeberry. It's a beautifully vertical, kind of airy shrub, and it's got these gorgeous berries on it. And the ones that we have in our property, boy, as soon as cold weather hit, those birds just ate every single one of them. They love these berries, and they're really good. And you might be surprised to find that the oak leaf hydrangea is native here, and that's a very versatile shrub. Now, ground covers. We have Pachysandra. You all know Pachysandra, and you probably know this one too, English ivy. I used to think English ivy is the prettiest thing because we didn't have it when I grew up, and I moved out east. And, oh, there's English ivy ever. Isn't that pretty? Because it is pretty, but it is a terribly destructive invasive. It will strangle a full-grown oak tree, and it will kill it. Now, I've heard a rumor, it's probably not true, but I've heard they've been known to eat small pets. Now, probably not true, but you never know. It's a bad thing. Don't plant it. There's so many other things that you can plant. This again is the Allegheny spurge. It's just gorgeous. This again is Pennsylvania sedge, wonderful ground cover. And these are the foam flowers, and with some native phlox in there. The little purple ones, that's the woodland phlox. This is just beautiful. Now the shade trees. This is an absolutely gorgeous tree, and it permeates our landscape. It's the Norway maple, and it is invasive, and it provides virtually no, if any, benefit to wildlife. Now, why would you plant this that gives you nothing in return when you could have this? This is our native maple. It's every bit as beautiful as the Norway maple, and it's a great supporter of our native wildlife. And then why would you plant a Norway maple when you have this? I mean, is there a tree that is more majestic, more gorgeous than our native white oak? The one next door to us died a couple of years ago, and I still miss it every day. And this is a wonderful plant. This is the river birch. It's a medium-sized tree, and they are you're starting to see them a lot now, and it's a really Lady Floribunda wrote about it in the Hyattsville Life and Times last episode. And it's a really, because we can't grow the paper white birches here, they don't thrive, but the river birch does, and it's quite nice. Now, I talked to you about trees and how like say the oak tree is such a great supporter of Lepidoptera, caterpillars, but it has to be accompanied with something. Let's take this tree. There's say 500 species of Lepidoptera, all those caterpillars chewing up around there and enjoying life. And the ones that survive the birds need a place to pupate. Now, if I'm a Lepidopteran caterpillar, I'm not going to hang out in that tree because all the birds know that I'm there. So I want to get off the tree and find another place with shelter. And this tree doesn't have that. It's hard-packed grass. So think in terms of planting something, having something around your trees so that when the caterpillars do their thing, they have a place to do it. So underplanting your native trees is not only beautiful, but it's really beneficial. And the other thing is, leave your leaves. And this is something I just discovered like 2 years ago. Throwing out your leaves, when you throw out your leaves, you throw out a lot more than just your leaves. Look at here, we got Luna moth cocoons, there's all these cocoons and eggs and this and that, and bumblebee queens. They all overwinter in our leaves. And so we stopped, Rick, we've always composted our leaves. We never throw them out, but we started wherever we can in our yard, just letting them stay. And they form a wonderful crunchy mulch. And I've noticed this year, this is the second year we've done it, this spring, I see more song sparrows in our yard, just jumping around in the leaves, than we've ever had before. So they really do, and it's a lot less work than raking your leaves. Not raking your leaves is a win-win, you know? So, okay. What kind, I have one on the list here, kind of a general list of native plant benefits. Most of them are perennial, and they can be divided. They've evolved to suit our soil and our climate, so they tend to be really hardy. They can handle drought and rain. They stabilize the soil. They generally have really good root systems. They clean impurities. They really help with runoff. They help with weed control. And I've got 2 slides of benefits. What's that? What do you think? They support other plants. They fill in the background. So if you have some beautiful non-native specimens, shrubs and trees, that's cool. You know, you don't need to get rid of those. We're not encouraging people to do that, but you can interplant them with a lot of native species. Great way to get rid of your yard. We don't have a blade of lawn grass in our whole property, not even in that little strip out by the street. Every blade of grass has been obliterated, and we've planted it all to dead leaves and native plants. Well, except for the non-natives we planted years ago. And once established, it's pretty low maintenance. And the other thing is native plants just make you happy. I mean, I'm happy, you'll be happy. Okay, so if you're considering a native plant landscape, these are some things to think about. You can replace lawn. You don't have to replace all your lawn. I mean, kids got to play, and you know, lawns are fine within limits. So, but you can edge your lawn with something like this. The other thing is you want to plant, and this is a really key concept to environmentally friendly landscaping, is you want to plant densely, and you want to plant in layers. We tend to think in terms of a tree here and a bush over here, and then a bed of perennials over there. Well, those things in nature all grew together. And here's a really good visual of that. And it shows the different layers of vegetation along with the different bird species that live in those layers. And every one of those layers is really important. And it also looks really nice that you plant that. It takes a little getting used to and a little planning maybe, but it really is a good way to create a nice, friendly environment. And provide food for birds, pollinators, and other wildlife. You know, so you can do this with berries, nuts, seeds, insects, and pollen, and nectar. I messed up that slide. Sorry about that. The other thing is, don't cut your trees all the way down. If you're cutting a tree down, if you have to cut your tree down, leave about 10 to 15 feet of the stump, and it will be a wonderful habitat for wildlife. Like, look at that. Isn't that better than not having a stump? And then your shrubs and small trees, you get a lot of birds build their nests. You want to have shelter for the birds and places for them to raise their young. And want to watch your water. Keep water on your property if you at all can. Partly for, you know, the birds and butterflies, all of them need water, a source of water. And you also want to keep water from running off your property. We live on the side of a hill and get rivers of water coming off the hill. And our goal is to have as little bit of that water as possible run off the other end of our property. And we spread it out, we soak it in, we do whatever we can to try to keep it there. And if you want some help, help is here. We have, and I wanted to shout out to Barry and Kathy here. They're on the line here. They live in Mount Rainier, and they have put together this program for, just started it a couple of years ago, and it's been amazingly successful. It's a Audubon Society backyard wildlife habitat program. And what they've done is organized volunteers who will visit your site. They will visit you at your home and spend about an hour with you, walking through your yard, and help you put together a plan for building wildlife habitat on your property. And you can don't have to know anything in order to have us come. Don't feel intimidated that you have to know a lot about gardening or a lot about wildlife. This is for everybody. And we have an army, a veritable army of volunteers now. And we have visited, I think, close to 300 properties already. And it's just a great thing. And this is what we do. We walk through with you, spend about an hour with you, and we help you set priorities. Try to help you not get overwhelmed. That's a really critical part of it, is that people can fit this into where they're comfortable. And we try to help you find that comfort zone. And we encourage you to apply to become a certified wildlife habitat site. You can do that. This is how you contact us, and I highly encourage you to do that. It's a great program. Thank you, Barry and Kathy. And this is what I did. I had a rental house I renovated in Capitol Heights, and I planted it entirely to native plants. It was just a hoot. We had a really good time. As you can see here, I have a non-native rose growing through the picket fence. But this is a nice little sign that you get, and it's a really worthwhile thing to do. Also, if you want help, the Prince George's County, if you want to get rid of pavement on your property, or if you want a rain garden, there's a rebate program in Prince George's County that's really great. I used that in Capitol Heights, and they paid $4,000 for me. And that's the second line there. The first one, a source for native plants, is Chesapeake Natives. It's a great, it's a nonprofit nursery in Southern Prince George's. It's a great place to get native plants. And ain't that pretty? Okay, we're open for more questions.
Okay. There was a question about keeping the water in your yard. What do you do about the mosquitoes?
Call Dawn Tab. No, it's a very good question. When I talk about keeping water on the property, I'm mostly talking about getting the water to soak into the ground. Like what we did on our property, we're kind of on the side of a hill, so water just kind of ran right off. So the first thing we did is we terraced it. We looked at where the water was coming from, and we kind of re-landscaped in a way to make it spread out as much as possible. There were places under a tree that were really dry, so we sort of channeled the water so it would pool under the tree and then soak in. And rain gardens are a really good way to capture water, because they're an engineer. You dig a big pit in your backyard and fill it with compost and sand and plant native plants in there. And it's designed to capture water. So you want to capture the water and get it into the soil rather than running off. And then rain barrels capture water that you use as water, but they have screens on them and such to keep the mosquitoes out. So it's a very important question. You don't want water pooling in your property. And if you have a bird bath, it's a great thing to have, but you want to rinse it out about twice a week in order to get rid of the mosquito larvae. So you want to be on top of that, definitely.
There was a question too about Chesapeake Natives. There's also something just coming up. They're having an open house that's in the chat. But do you happen to know the hour or when the Chesapeake Natives place is open?
No. Oh, yeah. No, that's a good question. They have Chesapeake Natives. I don't work there anymore, but they have regular sales, and that's what's going on at the end of the month. So if you go to the website, it's on that slide, chesapeakenatives.org. You will find information on that. Now, what we've done when the pandemic hit, we started selling things online for curbside pickup during the week. And you can check the website, and Barry may want to speak up, but you can check the website to see when and how that's available. But it's worked out pretty well. And the Chesapeake native plants are the most affordable native plants you're going to find. They're like $6 for the quart containers, which is really cheap. You're going to pay a lot more than that in any nursery. It's a great place, and they have a lot of species of native plants you can't find anywhere else. It's a good resource.
Carter just put their hours too in the chat.
Oh, good.
Also, I think, can't you get them from the university? Native plants?
I don't know.
I have a neighbor that works there and she frequently has native plants. Anyway, I don't know how to
I don't know how you do that.
get
No.
them that way. What's your feeling about sassafras trees? They're rarely mentioned.
Oh, I love sassafras trees. It's a native plant. Now, the thing with sassafras trees, we planted one and it was going beautifully, and then it just died one year. I've heard that can be a problem. I recommend, they're hard to find. It's hard to find them in the trade, in the nursery trade, but they're a great tree. They're beautiful, and I highly recommend if you can find it's a kind of medium-sized tree. If you can find one, it's a great tree to have.
This is a question maybe the questioner can weigh in on. I'm not sure I understand it. What about fences in yards, and how does that help the neighbors connect with each other? Do the fences interfere, I guess, is the question?
Well,
It's my question, and it has to do with the yards
okay, yeah. Okay, no, I know what's being asked. It's not, what it has to do with is fences as barriers to things like turtles, wildlife, terrestrial wildlife that needs to move from one yard to another, and the fence is a barrier. That absolutely is an issue. And I'm not an expert on that. I hate chain link fences. As a gardener, they're just, it's like ground zero for invasive vines to like take root, and you can't dig them out, and you can't get rid of them. They're just terrible. So the one thing is, like if you're doing a picket fence, if you have the pickets, I want to leave the pickets at like that far above the ground so your frogs and your turtles can get through. And that's one way to think about that. But be aware when you are, say, installing a fence of what you're doing, and there are ways to make them more permeable to different wildlife.
Thank you.
That's all the questions I see, Dave. If anybody has one, I guess if you'd like to use the raise hand option, you could ask your question or unmute yourselves.
Hi again. I just asked if there were native plants we can use in the garden that detract pests but attract bees, butterflies, like planting marigolds in the garden. Are there any native plants?
Yeah, I understand the question. I actually don't know that.
Maureen.
Yeah, somebody else may have a better idea on that. One thing about, I guess the way I would view that is, marigolds do their thing through kind of a chemical approach, but one thing that native plants can do is attract a healthy mix of insects, and many of those insects do help control the pests. So I think that is how native plants would kind of fit into that.
Okay.
I have a question about that that insect that's coming that everybody's all concerned about.
Oh God, the lanternfly.
And I've not seen anything about how to mitigate against it.
I can't respond to that. I'm not an expert in that at all, but it is another classic example of imported biological catastrophes. It's a really bad thing. I can't respond to it.
But do you know where one could ask?
Try the extension service. That site that on that one slide, there is the Maryland native, the plant resource. I can't remember the name of it, but it's on the local resources slide. It's the last bullet.
Okay, thank you so much.
Somebody had their hand up. I can't see it.
Oh, hi, it was me, Mary Lane. Dave, hi, it's Mary Lane.
Oh, hi, Mary.
Okay, so zinnias, are they, in my community garden plot, I usually grow zinnias and they attract a lot of butterflies and the goldfinch and so on. Now, but would there be something better than planting some zinnias? I do other flowers too, but would
No,
there be
zinnias
something
I
better to do?
love zinnias. They're gorgeous. The one thing about zinnias would be, and I was interested to hear about the goldfinches. I didn't think about them as eating the seeds, but let's just say a nice thing to mix in with your zinnias, or even as an alternative to the zinnias, would be your rudbeckias, which would be your black-eyed Susan and your orange coneflower, because those plants themselves do support the certain caterpillars. And so any native plant that gives you nice blooms that provide nectar and pollen would have the added benefit of providing sources for the caterpillars. Now, the two exceptions, I want to mention this, two rare exceptions, but really notable, of a non-native plant that provides really good benefit to our lepidopteran species would be dill and fennel, and parsley, because the swallowtail butterfly loves the caterpillars love those plants, and that's a really good thing to add to your vegetable garden that is going to provide some. I planted some dill once at a place I had in Mount Rainier, and the swallowtails just completely devoured it. Now, some people, traditionally, one would look, oh no, my dill's been eaten by these awful caterpillars. Well, no, your dill just fed some beautiful swallowtail butterflies. And so you got to think of it that way sometimes.
Yeah, I can do that. Good, thanks.
Betty Hearing says that there was an issue about Home Depot plants.
Oh,
And they treat their plants so that like home flowers, so that they're not good for natives or not good for caterpillars.
Yeah, there's a question about neonicotinoids or whatever, about, say, Home Depot plants being treated with these chemicals and whether that changes their whether they're toxic, their beneficial nature. I can't speak to that. I think you could probably find good answers on the internet, and I don't want to speak out of turn because I really don't. I know it's something to be concerned about, but I've not read up on it. Oh, I just thought of something.
Okay.
In the theme of plumbing fixtures in bathroom, in gardening, I think it'd be really cool if you had a old clawfoot tub and put it in your backyard, unless you're kind of bold, to plant potatoes in that. You could probably grow a whole winter's worth of potatoes in one good size clawfoot tub. It's got a drain hole in the bottom. It's perfect. People do use those as planters and stuff. But
there was a question earlier that I don't think we got to in the gardening bit, and potatoes made me think about, is growing sweet potatoes a similar process as other potatoes?
Oh, good question, Carter. No, totally different. One, they're not related, and two, whereas a potato tuber is technically an underground stem, the sweet potato is a root. And it's botanically speaking, it's a root versus a tuber. Now, the sweet potato, what you can do is get a sweet potato, and if it starts to sprout, if it's up on the top of it, it will send sprouts up. You can then plant that. But you need to get a they sell, and you can find them at nurseries. I'm sure you can get them online. They call them slips, I think. And they're basically little potatoes, sweet potato sprouts. Sweet potatoes are really fun to grow in your garden. They're not probably best for raised bed. Well, they might be okay for raised beds, but they do spread out. The deer love them too, so be careful about that. But they're a lot of fun to grow. They're just beautiful plants. And if you had them like on a wall, like so they're growing over the wall, and then back behind the wall, you had your sweet potatoes in the ground. They're a lot of fun, but it's a totally different kind of process than your. But look up, just Google, how to start sweet potatoes. You'll find some good tips. That was a good question. Thank you.
And another one that popped up in the chat about potatoes is, should you cut up sprouted potatoes before planting?
Oh, okay. If you were planting a potato field, what you would do is get a whole bunch of potatoes that are sprouting, and you would cut them up so that each piece of the potato has one in the little sprout. And you can do that if you want your potatoes to go further, but you don't have to. You can just plant the whole potato. And if I'm planting in containers, it's like a couple of potatoes, and I'm not cutting mine up, but you can do that as a way to make your seed potatoes go further. Mom used to do that.
Thank you, Mom. If we don't have, do we have more questions? I didn't see any.
I just have one from the beginning. I was looking for guidance as to how I could create a vertical wall garden.
I would Google that. I mean, Google
Okay.
knows more about that than I do.
Okay. I just didn't know because you were talking about the other kind.
Oh yeah, no, it's a wonderful thing to do, but I just haven't done that myself.
Okay, thank you.
So we're running up on the,
Mount Vernon has wonderful vertical gardens. One side is one fruit, one side is another, and they have great things there if you want ideas. They're going to have a plant sale soon, so.
okay.
Could you say the reference again? I didn't catch it all.
Mount Vernon,
Thank you.
I can post on the listserv when the sales are.
Okay, well, I can look it up. Thank you so much. I appreciate the reference.
Okay.
I would also like to thank Carter and Lisa, because like I say, I'm a total Luddite, and we had a really hard time making this work for me, and they were very patient and put a lot of effort into it. And I really appreciate it.
We learned a lot. So we're coming up on the witching hour here. I don't know, are you muted or are you? Okay. So I'm going to ask Marianne if she's still here to say something. I want you to mark your calendars for our session in April, which is on the 29th. Marianne, are you still on? And could you say something about Richard Serbo and the National Orchestral Institute that we're doing next month?
Looks like Marianne has dropped off.
Okay, so it's on April 29th. Richard Serbo is the director of the National Orchestral Institute, which brings students, I think, from all over the country to play with and to learn from the folks at the University of Maryland. He'll be showing pieces from previous events. I think all of their programs run in May, and he'll explain how you can get tickets. I think there are some tickets that are free. In May and June, we hope to get back to some of the arts in the area. I'm thinking particularly about maybe showcasing Pyramid Atlantic, but if anybody else has some additional ideas, please get back in touch with Bonnie McClellan or Marianne Hakes or myself or Carter, and we'll figure something out. If that's all, then Betty.
If I may add, the NOI, National Orchestra Institute, is the month of June. Every year, there are over 100 musicians who come. They have 3 or 4 conductors that they work with. They have to learn tons of music. It's a wonderful experience for them. But for our communities, it's really wonderful. There's just something going on almost every day. There are teaching sessions. You can go to their concerts. All of it would be on the University of Maryland, Clarice
Clarice.
website.
the- They do a big concert at my church, St. Andrews, but it is also just in College Park. We're a
Right.
block off Route 1.
Right, and
And
they
do
do
a
something.
concert there every year.
It is the most fun thing in the world. And if you really, really like to support this kind of thing, Marianne Hakes, who is not on right now, has something called Ignite. And you can be a member of Ignite. It involves making larger donation to support scholarships for the students, but then there are also lots of social events with it related to the music. So it's one of the best things that happens in our area. I would highly recommend looking into it.
Thanks a lot, Bonnie. That was helpful. I appreciate it. So I think that's all for today. I want to thank everybody for coming and especially thank Dave for his great presentation. This will go up on HAP's website and our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to get to be able to review it if you miss things or if you want to make copies of it.